now. We have intercepted Mary on her return journey from the moon, and we want all the latest on the information that we have now to share. I believe that you have been in Medjugorje, is that true?
It is, Father.
And what were your experiences there?
Well, it was really, as always, it's a very holy and sanctified place, and every aspect of it, like so many of our beautiful shrines, are all holy. You know, so there's such a wealth of holy ground right up to the top of the mountain in Krizvik, the Cross Mountain, and also onto Apparition Hill with the Stations of the Cross, and throughout the grounds of the church, and right down to the graveyard.
Exactly. I was there in the past, way back now, 4 times, and I think the second time was after ordination, and very soon after ordination, and I was there, and because I was ordained, I was able to be pretty close, actually right next to Maria during an apparition, and the priests were there in the sanctuary area of this chapel, and it just happened I was right. So, and I observed all that was going on there, and I did observe 1 or 2 things, including the fact that given the shortness of the apparitions normally, that was usually, I would say by the standards I've heard, it would have been twice or 3 times the average length. And we were given to understand afterwards that Our Lady had been very pleased with the number of priests that were around her, and that she stayed a bit longer because of that. But we were also told this, and it's something which is to be borne in mind. She had been about 10 minutes late, I think, with regard to what was expected normally, because they're fairly average, the times when they come, because everything stops at Medjugorje at that time. Mm-hmm. And apparently the reason was, it was explained afterwards, that she wasn't pleased with precisely the way the priests were sitting there, cross-legged, awaiting some kind of show, and that wasn't the attitude that they were supposed to be having. Now, that is something I'd like to pick up in the context of what I want to fix today. I want to fix liturgical fidgets, because what's going on in that realm there is a parallel of what is going on in the liturgical sphere. People are coming for a show, people are coming to be entertained, and this attitude of physical discrepancy with, as it were, just casualness is an echo of something which is far deeper, and the problem therefore is far deeper. Would you agree?
Yes, very much so, Father, and just recently, in the last number of weeks, just a couple of different things have come to my own attention, and the Lord has been so kind in letting me see that it's Holy Mass that is important, and not so much the content or the quality or the length or the integrity so much of the homily, but it is Holy Mass. And you know, sometimes people say, oh, I don't really, I don't really, I'll go to the other Mass because I'm not that fussed on the homily from that particular priest, and you're going, but it's Holy Mass, and Holy Mass is linked into heaven, and the only eternal one Holy Mass, and therefore the priest is linking into that. And some priests have got a great gift as a homilist, but others maybe don't have the same degree of gift, but they have a different set of gifts. And but it's like when you say about this entertainment, that word just struck that chord with me, that we're not going there to have our ears tickled. We're there to glorify, honour and plead with God for all they will, first of all with gratitude for everything He has given us, and also to plead with Him to heal us from our sinfulness.
Yeah. The element of going as beggars, the attitude which has become almost the norm in some areas is to go in quite the contrary. How great I am. It's precisely the contrary of what the Lord wanted in the parable with regard to the Pharisee and the publican. So the impetration of graces, the not even willing to be looking upwards, but to be just beating one's breast, is very much the attitude they have in the East. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, just asking for mercy all the time, and gestuality entering into it. And the whole notion of drawing attention to oneself doesn't enter into it. One just disappears in a cloud of glory. If I'd have heard that from somebody who knows what that person is talking about, that in the Eastern Orthodox Church they're very humble in their praise, because the human just disappears. They just disappear on the level of their personality, and there's nothing the priest can do to glorify himself except sing well. And by the way, in the East, you know that they won't ordain them unless they can sing. It's the condition. If he's in trouble, they'll have to form him before he's admitted, but they will not ordain a person who can't sing, because the whole liturgy is sung for 3 hours. So that's why I have such good liturgy. They also have a notion of liturgy which is divine and not at all human. They wouldn't dare to tamper with it. And you know, one reason why they've survived all these centuries without changing anything, it's partly because all their heads are well formed in prayer, because of this rule of celibacy for the bishops. That is to say, that they're coming from the non-married clergy, they're coming from monasteries, they're often abbots and so on, who are good people of prayer and formed in fasting and long adoration, liturgical prayer mode, for hours and hours on end. The whole of their youth gone into the monastics formation, which gives them a certain clout when it comes to spirituality. In the West, as you've observed, they tend to make one big category, but with regard to suitability, is he a good administrator? And one therefore doesn't always follow that he's also a good liturgistic. There are quite a few bishops who can't even sing and don't even think about it. See, that means the whole of the pontifical liturgy is not what it should be, compared with the East, which is where also we're coming from, because the Church was one initially, and all we have in the West has come through the adaptation when it got to Rome to what was coming from the East. Now, on this day, we have the reference to what happened to Saul as he was on the ground there, and of course he was told what he had to do. Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And he's to get up and to go, and it'll be told him what to do. So he's told by Ananias, and he of course then has his eyes opened on every level. But I want to go for a second to the question of Ananias, that this house where Ananias was, it's in Damascus, and there things have been happening since I think the 1980s. I'm not sure. It's she's alive in Myrna, and she's under Rome from the point of view of the jurisdiction, because she's not Western Rite, but nevertheless Eastern Rite under Rome. And I think her husband would have been Orthodox, therefore not under Rome. But the point is, brought up in the whole atmosphere of the East and what that implies. Now, she is the one, just by chance, that it was used by the Lord to get an important message to the Church, East and West. That it started with these icons doing strange things, miracles as a result of oil coming out of them. But then things became more clear. When every 5 years or so, Easter was the same in East and West, there were lots and lots of big miracles coming through, and the Lord was giving a discreet message, and also the words were coming through eventually that this is what he wanted. He wanted this separation of dates and all the rest of it healed. And that message did get eventually to the Vatican, that they did listen to it. And they're under John Paul II, they did arrange a meeting from a delegate with her, I understand. And but he may actually have come across it himself when he was somewhere, I can't remember, but the point was they listened to it because they got the same message from different sources. I think Vasula also was given the same teaching. But anyway, the point is this: why is this coming to the fore now? It's kind of important because of the longer now than ever separation between East and West as regards modalities and history. There's this forgetting our roots coming in. We haven't got the break of our big brother in the East. We've only got the other side to which we make reference in ecumenism in practice. It's the Protestants, and there's not a good reference. Our real blood brothers, the closest to us, are those who have the sacraments, but in the East in separation since 1054, which was only initially a momentary bust-up which spread and didn't get healed. They tried to heal it in 1439 in Florence, but the East didn't accept the consequences. Remember the famous phrase when they got back, we'd rather be under the Saracens than under Rome. and so the East fell in 1453, and we know the consequences. So since then, of course, it's got further and further and further away. But we need to retrieve that, as Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II were trying hard to do. Famous phrase of John Paul II, the Church has to learn to breathe again with its two lungs. Now, what I'm getting at is this. That would be, if we had that element of sharing more with the East, we would have a correct optic on our history and what we're doing in the liturgy. We have lost completely in some areas the notion of what liturgy is about. And Benedict, of course, the XVI, he was very much aware of it. And that's partly why he was hoping that the availability of the Old Rite would help also in the West to find its roots, which is very close. The Tridentine Mass, the unaltered Mass of the centuries, going back to Gregory the Great, that, and of course even further in its origin, that is in its thrust close to the Divine Liturgy of the East, especially the High Mass, because the feeling is the same, that the mystery is there and the untouchable is before us. That's the concept we've lost. What would you react from that, Mary?
Oh, I agree, Father. Having attended the Maronite liturgy, the Divine Liturgy, on 3 occasions last summer, when we had the religious from the monastery of St. Charbel visiting Northern Ireland, the Divine Liturgy, it was truly divine. I mean, you just transported between the incense raising all of our prayers to heaven and the beautiful heavenly singing of the priest, Father Eli, the Maronite monk who celebrated the Divine Liturgy. I mean, it just blew my mind, to be quite honest. I was completely transported, and I have never had that experience so strongly, or I've never had the experience of the Divine Liturgy from the Maronite sort of church, and the transporting of to a different place, which I have had in Mass in the extraordinary form, yes, and some of the Masses, some of the celebrations I have had that, but it was just completely divine.
Yeah, and they wouldn't even think of tampering with it, it's just divine,
No.
and they haven't the right to, even in Scripture. Guard the deposit, it's given to Timothy, I believe, by Paul, and it's something that they very much are aware of. It's a treasure which they handle with great care. And of course it was in their own way also enriched over the centuries, because there is some use in the West of their liturgy, where we have, actually at 7 o'clock this morning I sang with people who were in at Mass, there's an Eastern Byzantine Our Father which has come into the West. It also goes into harmony. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be, that's Byzantine. Yeah. It's beautiful. And also, when at 7 o'clock I have a fairly Eastern Rite liturgy, that is of the prayers that one calls universal prayers. That's the intercessions there, but that will be sung here in a fairly Eastern mode, Kyrie eleison and so on. And it's therefore there are things which can be used for the good, and Taizé also, strangely enough, recuperated certain elements of that, as did the Beatitudes. They have, in the atmosphere of the charismatic window there in France, the Beatitudes, they have got a very interesting blend of East and West. Lots of incense, lots of polyphony. Of course, they have the voices mixed. And also they've taken on board quite a bit of Hebrew stuff as well, especially on the Shabbat. But all that to say that our heritage needs to be looked at in its entirety, and being so far away from the rest of the world, especially in Ireland, we're not seeing enough. We're only used to one thing. We're not challenged by something. You who've gone around the world, I think you probably would agree that Ireland is not the best place on earth for liturgy.
No, Father, sadly. There are pockets, yes, but in general, no.
You mentioned in passing the question of the homily, that our brethren Protestants, of course, they develop that far more because that's all they have in practice, so therefore that's the centre of it, and they do it well. remember actually when I was in school, opposite the church, opposite the school, there was a high Anglican church, and there was celebrating, there were lots of ritual there, but very high Anglican, and we would go down again to talk to the clergy because they were friends. So we asked one very young curate there, how long do you take to pay your sermon? And he answered, well, about 3 days. It's very sort of 3 days, yeah, 3 days. how many days, I wonder, does the average parish priest in Ireland take? I don't know, I don't judge, but it's very nifty. If you go on for more than 5 minutes, they start to grunt and look at their watches, and it's not encouraging, Mary. So they're up against it, and of course they've got to be very careful what they say. So it's not helpful either, because good preaching has to be pretty sharp and to the point and not afraid to say things, otherwise it's just platitudes, and they can't do that easily because the people will start to grunt and make noises to the bishop. It's a difficult situation, Mary.
Oh, very, very much so, yes.
PC. But I want to go directly into the question of liturgy, and this question of the exploitation, the hijacking of what is a useful podium for drawing attention to oneself has become the determining issue in quite a few situations, e.g. funerals, weddings and so on, where people are there for social occasions without the depth of faith, and the priest is up against it there too. He's being told what to do and what not to do. It's a very difficult situation, and the kind of music they're coming out with is nobody's business.
True. Yeah. No, it is, Father. It's very obvious that it's not the same holy liturgical celebration as it would be on, either on a Sunday or a weekday mass. Yeah, I've seen that myself. I
remember when I was in Romania one time, helping a convent, there was a Frenchman came to stay for a while also, and we were able to discuss and share things there, and hear his confessions, that kind of thing. But at mealtimes he was coming out with a few interesting things. He was a Frère de Saint-Jean, l'Évangéliste, the Petit Gris, they're very grey, and they're very well educated, and they have good liturgy too. Well, he was based in Bucharest, and he happened to get to know the Eastern Orthodox monastery that wasn't too far from where their house was, so he'd be going backwards and forwards there a bit and dialoguing, because he'd spoke Romanian. And one day the abbot, or the Higumenos, died, and he was invited to go to the funeral, and he just added simply 4 heures, 4 hours liturgy. And he also went on to explain even was a difference between the Orthodox as such and the Uniates. There are some who, actually that's a question that was some of our own Eastern Rite Catholics in Romania were forced into the Orthodox Church under communism, and they were trying to get their churches back as well. It's a very complex issue. Anyway, but he pointed out that the old Orthodox ones actually, they had a profundity which those who were closer to us in the West didn't have, e.g. the iconography was far deeper and so on, and they certainly in the monastic life, he felt they had a profound and deep anchoring in ancient tradition, which has been transmitted despite the communist thing, actually, because they respected a bit the monasteries a little bit, and very severe, they quite be pretty hard religious life they have, but they didn't change things, fasting and so on, very severe. But he insisted the exposing of the soul to 3 and 4 hours of solid liturgy in another world in one chunk like that didn't leave the soul unchanged. He explained how it changed the whole ethos inside and outside, and one entered into mode, and he referred to the whole thing of hesychasm. Hesychia in Greek is silence, but it comes to mean more in the monastic world. It's a whole stillness, a whole penetrating of the interior by the exterior, and by getting in contact with the silent one who's waiting for us to meet him in that silent place. Our Western things is fidgety and orientated towards, as it were, functioning with a limit of time and being interested in performing well. The East doesn't go that way. It's looking upwards for a long period, being carried by a wave of something greater and something more powerful. We're not creating, we're receiving and encountering. It's a whole ethos of going into something greater and not having to perform. What are your thoughts on that, Mary?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have the experience apart from that little experience of the Maronite celebrations. But they weren't, they were the sort of 45-50 minute length of time of Holy Mass would be. So I didn't really get to appreciate that. But that
the Marinus Uniates, they'd be influenced by the West.
Yeah, and I just, but yes, but it would just be such a gift to be able to participate in a liturgy like that, so that you would have that sense.
I found with the Tridentine Rite, actually, especially the sung one, there is an element of that. One disappears in a cloud of glory, facing not them but God. It doesn't even think about them, and it's quite a different mode. Facing the people in itself is actually distracting.
Well, it would be, Father, and yes, I mean, in the Tridentine, yes, I have had that sense where you're just totally focused, and it's up there, not on that level. It's in that vertical ascent rather than the sort of just across the way that.
Yes, it's the vertical, not the horizontal. And I mentioned the term liturgical fidget. It comes from C.S. Lewis. He's writing, he dies fairly early on. He's a great apologist. He didn't become a Catholic, but he had sympathised. We know that he sympathised. But he does talk himself in Mere Christianity, I think, about the problem that even the Roman Catholics have the problem of the liturgical fidget. And that's going back to the 60s now. So things were, remember the 60s, things were changing.
Yeah.
There was the period after 1962 to 1969-70 when there was experimentation going on until it settled with a new missal that came out eventually, but things were getting out of hand. And actually Paul VI was breathing down the necks of the concilium. They were the body who were getting it together under Annibale Bonini. He's saying, get this finished because it's becoming chaotic. You have to have some kind of standard.
Yeah.
So anyway, the question of what happened in the council years in itself is indicative of the problem, because when the council fathers got through that very good document, Sacro Sacrum Concilium, it's the first of all to be published. It was a deeply spiritual document indicating what's needed to just tweak basically what was there. It wasn't a remaking ex nihilo, it was expected. And in fact, the missal that was the one that came out in 1965 was a halfway house. Remember, that was valid until 1969-1970, and it had readings already in English, but the canon was in Latin, and basically it was the Tridentine, and all the exterior was maintained. But that was out there, and that could have easily remained. But the thing was that when it came to the concilium, they didn't think that adaptation was enough. They wanted something a bit more radical, and that's when things took an orientation which the council fathers themselves had not expected, because the result globally was a new mass with a new dynamic completely. It wasn't, the mystery had been lost to some extent. You see, the canon in silence, that was still in 1965, that was there until 1969. Things didn't really change radically until the new missal came out, and it was all in Latin, of course, the canon. That contained the mystery, but now in practice what one has is, in bad celebrations, an unstoppable flow of words. You can't stop people talking.
I know.
There's no silence. They're afraid of silence. And if there's a silence, they have to make it as short as possible, e.g. with extraordinary ministers, that kind of thing, which wasn't even dreamt of actually by the Council Fathers.
No.
So you see, there are lots of things one after the other which have taken place of what could have been, as Benedict XVI was trying to maintain, the hermeneutic of continuity, that the continuity could have been there, and he was trying to maintain it, bring it back, that it wasn't necessarily to have this mentality, a new mass was invented, because it can be done in the way of the old, in its thrust, which is, by the way, what we had at Sant'Antimo. We maintained the Ad Orientem on the high altar, on weekdays anyway, with incense every day, entirely in Latin, fully sung, and it worked, and people thought it was the old. It wasn't, it was actually the new, because the text was that of the Missal of Paul VI in Latin. So it can be done, and that, I think, the Pope had made aware of Sant'Antimo. He was aware of it, and he was glad because he was applying his thought on the matter, the hermeneutic of continuity. And that's what he would have liked to have seen more. So the mentality has come in, which is influenced also by Protestantism, unfortunately, because the mentality became somewhat not just Anglican but Protestant in slant in these last years, when people have come 3 generations after the changes. They have not been exposed to the old at all, but they've been more exposed to what's coming out of the Protestant Reformation, instead of the East, which would be really our blood brothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it is worse, because they've got then precisely the fidget who invents, who changes, who can't just stick to what is there. Remember the old phrase, say the black and do the red.
No, I'm not aware of that one.
Yeah, the black is what you say and the red is what you do. The rubrics, rubros is what is read in print. You don't say that, but you have to do it. If you're not, you're disobeying. And you see, if you're disobeying the one you're worshipping, there's no worship, because the will isn't being in subjection. It's doing its own thing, and it's hijacking what is sacred. And then you've got the element then of because you're facing the people, you tendentially forget that you're not actually addressing the people. I mean, people, they're used to facing each other to talk, aren't they? And there are priests who are talking a lot to their people when they're at the altar even. The mentality, and inventing a lot as they're going along, it's not liturgy. It's not understanding what liturgy is.
No.
And then you've got also collateral problems which weren't envisaged initially. It's with the insistence on participation as a purely external thing. You have to have people doing things which they're not competent at. And you see, unfortunately, the wealth of liturgical renewal we have now in the Word, the lectionary, which is very rich and very good, is badly exploited, because people not competent are coming up, invited the last minute to do the first reading, that kind of thing, and they can't read in public. It's a whole art. Until the wealth of liturgy, until the gospel is, a lot of it is just sacrificed in the interest of participation, badly understood. And of course the psalm, which is meant to be sung, is rarely sung by the lay. They can't do it. And then so the prayers of the faithful, they're whizzed through, they could be sung in litanic mode, and there's a lot that is not exploited in New Mass itself. And then you've got this question, and people having to do all kinds of things and inventing something for them to do. One thing, of course, is when there's no need at all, extraordinary ministers, they're there by exception for very large numbers. And in Poland, they go into very insistent rules on that one. They won't let people even think of having extraordinary ministers, and if they're not getting into the hundreds of people coming up for communion, because it's on a weekday to have people coming to the tabernacle, going straight to the tabernacle, that kind of thing, is just liturgical abuse, which also is part of a problem, because it's feeding the bad education of the people who see how banal Holy Communion is. It's not right. Whereas in the East, one is not even allowed to go to communion without confession. The priest knows exactly who's going to go to communion before the celebration. He's been confessing them before. So, and therefore, although they've gone very much in the other direction, which we used to have under Jansenism in the West, nevertheless, they are protecting the sacred. And it's not either or, but both. We need to recuperate something of the best of them. And even actually, you wouldn't believe this, but the nonconformists in Wales don't have the casualness that we have now, because they don't have a frequent celebration. In Scotland, it's every 3 months they have the Holy Communion, and in Wales it's every month. The nonconformists, and actually even John Henry Newman, when he was an Anglican, he admits that in his writings. He didn't celebrate every Sunday. It was matins and evensong. They were the big ones. They'd be preaching all right at those, but it was the Oxford movement which brought in the frequent celebration of Holy Communion in the Anglican Communion, and then it became more differentiated between. In lots of parishes still in England, you will see Holy Communion at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you might have sung matins and sung evensong. But that's another question again. But all that to say that the Anglicans, they wouldn't celebrate quite so casually as we would. And we need to learn dignity. And they, of course, have maintained kneeling at Holy Communion. And they've maintained the altarils, and they maintained quite often the rood screen. They demolished things initially, but then it was stabilised. Whereas we changed a lot in a short time and lost our head. I remember when I was going to Mass in the country in Wales, they had the shared use of an Anglican church. It was a very old one actually, where an uncle might have been Anglican clergyman way back. Llanfechain, there, a beautiful old church, and the Anglicans would use the old altar facing the other way, behind the rood screen, and we would have a table put in the midst of the nave. Just the irony of it. So I think we need to look at this more carefully. The intuition that both Benedict XVI and Cardinal Sarah had, that the recuperating of the orientation would be a useful element of recuperating the internal orientation. Of course, Benedict XVI admitted it couldn't really be done because the changes had been made even physically all over the place, but he wanted a virtual orientation by placing the cross on the altar facing the priest so that they were actually looking at Jesus, not at people, and the sacrificial mode could be seen. That does help actually, because if you're looking at people, it's looking at people, thinking about people. If the priest himself is of deep prayer mode, he will maintain that at the altar. If, on the other hand, his orientation is always towards people all the time, he'll bring that with him to the altar. And also, if he's been talking a lot in the sacristy, he'll bring that to the altar.
Yeah.
The sacristy is a place of silence. And then you've got also things which don't help when you get people doing the parts of the priest, which happens a lot. It happens a bit, actually, even in the old rite, you've got a bit of that happening. It's people don't do, that's not the question, but mainly in the new rite, there's a lot of abuse of people saying parts which are meant for the priest alone. And the way in which they respond now is very quick, you know. People who come from England are quite surprised at the speed at which people reply. The response is in Ireland. They do some better in England. But then, you see, what's happened in Ireland is there's an influence of the Rosary has come on into liturgy, because what happened after the Second Vatican Council, they kept the speed of before, and as somebody commented, more of the same thing. The renewal didn't pass fully in Ireland because the speed went on, because one of the problems in the old rite until the changes was the actual speed at which it was done. It was very quick. You wouldn't have heard it a lot, but the priests were going very quickly quite often with the altar boys. So they tried to address that. They wanted that to calm down, fewer words and so on, and not repeating things. But in Ireland, the Rosary is said very quickly, and so is the liturgy, even in English. And again, therefore, the fullness of renewal was not perceived. In the East, because it's sung, and they don't have a notion of time at all, they don't go there. They don't measure it. God is beyond time. You don't put him in a clock.
Yeah, I can see that, Father. Right, yeah, what you're saying just makes perfect sense.
So, what do you see as the way forward? Is there anything that can done to fix it?
I honestly don't know. I think there's, I think the pressure is going to be on our clergy to become more administrators as parishes are put together, linked together in families of parishes. So you could have, whereas you had one parish before, you could now have really 2 or 3 parishes together, but you don't have a concomitant increase in the number of clergy. So I can't see that being conducive.
Yeah, that's one thing that happened. They tried to provide a lot of celebrations in Ireland. In France, they reduced them drastically. The priests were not easily binate in France, or certainly not trinate. But the celebration would always be an hour long. In Saturday evening on Sunday, every Sunday Mass is a fully sung Mass in a different way now, but they do sing it. It lasts an hour. The preaching is well done. That's an ancient French tradition, the well done sermon. But then people used to, what they call animation de messe. Lay people who are experts at animating the Mass, and it's done quite well. With the use of responsorial song, they get people sung again, cantor and congregation, that kind of thing. But that's what happens in France. They do it quite well. There's been a good renewal on that level. Whereas in Ireland, they didn't do that. They just got into the low Mass basically, with a few hymns thrown in now and again.
Yeah.
And that's also encouraged by the fact the priest is expected to do more than one celebration. Therefore, he's timing himself. He's got to get to another altar. So it doesn't help the quality. And also repeating the Mass in a short time doesn't help the priest either to be aware of what he's doing. You see, one goes into automatic pilot, it's dodgy.
I can see that, yeah, when you explain it so clearly. I really can see that.
So anyway, it's not quite so simple.
Yeah.
What we need, Mary, is a hurricane, as we had in Wales. The Spirit of the Lord filling the whole earth. The last was 1904-05. Would that it happened again on the level of the whole church. In that way we would have, from the inside, a clearer understanding of what it means to praise the Almighty God. Yes, there was a man in South Wales who was a great expert at leading his brethren in prayer. He would praise and praise and praise, take off in praise. And then one day he was taking off with hallelujah, hallelujah. He died praising the Lord. What a wonderful way to die.
Amen.
Dying, praising the Lord, and our hearts and gives in. Yes. Whoa, we put our stopwatch on and get it over and done with. The big element, like in the Rosary and Ireland, get to the end. Oh, the end. Oh, yeah.